Okay, well, thank you, first of all, for being willing to be here and answer some questions about the history of Guelph and Area Right to Life over. We're celebrating 50 years this year, so that's pretty exciting. I would love to know, Ellen, if you're willing to start, why did you first get involved with Guelph and Area Right to Life?
Well, it was thanks to Velma Moyer, the late Velma Moyer, who was also a Valeriot. I think she was a Valeriot before she married Fred Moyer. And I was vaguely pro-life because I'd grown up pro-life, but it was one of those, didn't think about it much. And then I saw an ad, a full-page ad in the Guelph Mercury of an unborn child, about 4 or 5 months gestation, and the caption, "What about his rights?" And I said, "Oh, well, yes, what about the baby?" And so there was a phone number, and I phoned, and I didn't get Velma, I got a friend of hers, and she was very wary and very scared, and they had apparently had some really, really awful responses. People
Okay, yeah, having it in the news like that?
Being quite angry and unpleasant and very tough. But Velma had apparently got together with a group of friends and they had bought the ad. So that was really what started things off. And then there was a commission of some kind. Keith probably remembers it better. I can't remember. It was something to do with the Ontario government. And Velma Moyer asked me to go and make a presentation there. And I had a toddler, my son Mark, and I was heavily pregnant with my second. And I went and made a presentation to this group.
Okay, that's so
Then
cool.
I had to leave Puslinch, where I lived, and go back to England. My husband was doing an MBA, and I was gone there for almost 2 years, came back to my home and got an invitation to join Guelph and Area Right to Life, which Keith and Betty had set up. And so we started going to their home. Do you remember Keith and Betty?
Yes.
And sorry, Elizabeth.
And we, I'm switching down all the time.
There was Rita Alessio and Trudy Adama. And Paul Tesaro was the treasurer.
And Junes and Rupert Smith.
Yes. And so Keith and Elizabeth then were pretty much, they got it going in an official way. It had been unofficial.
Okay.
And it just been, so we didn't have meetings or anything. I think there was just Velma and me.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And so once I got back though, and Keith and Elizabeth had really got something going properly. And I don't know when you became registered as Guelph Right to Life.
1974.
Right, because we're hitting our 50 years. So
Yes,
that makes sense.
Right. So I guess I got back, was it 75? You must already have registered by then.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right.
So that was the start.
Okay, well, that's a good segue into Keith and Elizabeth. If you guys could share how and maybe why you guys started Guelph and Area Right to Life.
Well,
Go ahead.
we've been involved with pro-life since 1971. And gone to the first pro-life demonstration in Canada, which was the Mother's Day March in Toronto on Mother's Day of 1971.
That's cool.
We then moved to Prince Edward Island when I was teaching there, and co-founded PEI Right to Life. And when we moved to Guelph in the summer of 1974, we looked around for a pro-life group, and we're told that there had been a group. A group had come into existence, and Velma Moyer had started it. But it seemed to have elapsed or was not active. And so we started trying to call people, find out people to call. And so that's how we got in touch with Ellen and some of the people you mentioned, the Adamas, Dr. Jane Hostel, Timothy and Rupert Smith, and some others. and began as Guelph Right to Life. And I guess we incorporated very shortly thereafter and
Right.
we began actual operations.
That's really neat. And what about you, Elizabeth? How are you all involved in that?
Oh, well, we did it together and everyone took turns being president over the next 10 years.
Okay.
I think we all.
I think we were all
had
president
it,
at some time or
for
other.
some time, right, Ellen? You were president in June once and we were, yeah.
I was,
Yeah.
yes, I think we all took turns, didn't we?
Exactly. And in 76, 77, we had enough support to be able to open an office downtown. And
Okay.
remember, it was that funny little office in the old building on Woolwich Street, and yeah, it was just a tiny little place, but it was a place to have everything and to be a legitimate presence in the Guelph community. And in fact, what was really interesting, we were just talking about it coming in today. We used that office in 1979 to 81 or 2 to also co-host the Committee to Save the Boat People. I know, I think you were in California at the time, Ellen. And so we used that office as a community outreach for the group to be able to help, bring in refugees at the time, which was very new to us, not now, but then it was.
Okay.
Quite a new
That's
thing.
cool.
And using that office, I think Guelph brought in more refugees than any other community in the country,
Wow.
supported by churches, but also by individuals, like family groups or groups that got together, friendship groups who provided the support and funding for families. So that was a very interesting outreach
That's amazing.
for the community. Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
That's pretty cool. So, Alan, I'll ask you, why is the pro-life movement and being involved in Guelph Area Right to Life, why is that important to you?
Well, I guess it was important because of what I said when I looked and I said, yes, there are 2 people involved. And then I always used to wonder, I'm 80, so when I was young, the Second World War had just finished and we heard about all of the atrocities and everything. And I used to think to myself, I wonder if I would have, helped people, helped the Jewish people, and would I have recognized their humanity? And I don't know whether I would have done, but I certainly thought, at least now it's not a crime to recognize the humanity of the unborn and the handicapped. It started to become obvious that it wasn't just the unborn, because a lot of the reasons for abortions were because the child was going to be handicapped.
Right.
And I knew people, I met people through the pro-life movement who told me that they were aborting because the child had a handicap. And that was just so fundamentally wrong. I mean, it's so, I can't understand why anyone wouldn't be able to see that, but obviously many don't.
Well, and that's such a powerful story, right? You kind of
Yes.
said, would I have done something during the world wars?
Right.
And now you're like, this is something I can do. Let's do
And I probably
this.
wouldn't have done because I'm not very brave.
Okay.
But it was quite difficult at times. I remember going to the University of Guelph and a lot of hostility.
Yeah.
And of course, I was always glad to be with Elizabeth because I was the and and well, I can't quite remember this. And Elizabeth had statistics like this.
Yeah.
She could reel it off.
Okay.
And we would go on speaking engagements together. And I was the,
Well, and it's
talking
good
about,
to have both of those. Like, good for you for hopping in, even though you weren't too sure about those presentations. You came in anyway.
Yeah, I wasn't really very good at it, but Elizabeth was terrific. She knew, she could always remember everybody's names, all the experts and fetal development and everything. And I'd be sort of, but she knew it all. So if you could, if you don't if you're not particularly good at public speaking or anything like that, if you've got someone who can at least reel off the statistics and not get tongue-tied.
Yeah,
Right.
that's really neat. Elizabeth, can you share more about that? Like those experiences presenting to the
Oh,
university?
gosh, those were the years when you were actually allowed into high schools too, the Catholic high schools. And it's really, it was a very interesting experience because at that point, the schools were still enough Catholic that we did not meet a lot of opposition. I mean, you couldn't even go in now, but, you know, there were those who were questioning and those who didn't accept things, but, I'll never forget one talk that we did. I think it was Keith and I who happened to do this one in a high school in Guelph. And, we didn't think about it again until about 6 years later. We were invited to a party at a house of one of Keith's graduate students. And so we go to this house, and the party's downstairs, actually in the basement. And so we're about to walking down the stairs to the basement, and there's a picture on the wall. And it's a picture of this fellow and his wife, and they had 3 little children. And as walking down the stairs, he turned to Keith and he said, "By the way, they're your fault." Because he, you know, he was so moved by the pro-life message in that talk that, you know, he went on, got married and had children, and
Right,
was questioning a lot when he was in high school. And yeah, so I
that's
thought,
really neat.
you know, you don't often get feedback, as you say, Ellen. It was sometimes difficult, and you didn't get positive things. But in this case, it took what, 6 or 7 years later before the fruits of that talk came through. So you never know, and I'm sure Jackie has more experience, can attest to this, how much you have an impact, even though at the time it doesn't seem it.
Yeah.
Right, you guys had planted that seed, and you don't always get to see,
You don't
okay,
know
like,
what the fruit will be at all, but that's the only, one, I think the only time, isn't it? that
Well,
you have-
I think one of the experiences that I think we've all had speaking, is you talk to an audience and they're kind of largely blank faces look at you, some hostility, some blank. And then after the talk is over and you're about to leave, people will sidle up to you and say, well, you know, I actually agree with you, but I didn't want to say anything at the meeting. And you
yeah,
think, well, okay, at least I'm kind of reinforcing your belief that
right,
you're not completely crazy, that there is reason for your belief. But it's always slightly discouraging. I think, you know, it would have helped during the talk if you stuck up your hands and, yeah, I kind of agree with that. But it's better some support even late in the day than the total hostility.
In 1976, it was a woman's year of the woman, or women's year. And Guelph was organizing a parade downtown, a women's parade. And it was coordinated by Professor Anderson from the university, a very, very rabid feminist. But
okay,
we decided that, hey, it's the year of the woman, we need to be involved. So
yeah,
we proposed a float for the parade, and they couldn't turn us down because they were probably getting funding from somewhere, and
right,
they didn't want us there. I mean, there was a lot of negativity, but they had to put up with us having a float in that parade. In fact, I think we have pictures somewhere of that. It was just a very simple float with, you know, kids and balloons and positive pro-life messages on it. But yeah, those were gentler days. So even those who
right.
disagreed with you were civil about it.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you could do things that much more difficult to do now.
Right, that's so cool that you guys, yeah, you made sure you had that presence there, very
Yeah, and
important.
again, you don't know what effect something like that had on the community as you rolled through too.
Right, exactly, and just raising awareness, I'm sure,
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Like, Guelph and Area Right to Life, we're here.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. I love to hear these stories from back in the day.
Uh,
But Keith, I would love to know, why is pro-life work so important to you?
It's going to sound abstract, but it's not really. When the abortion issue first arose, I was thinking about it and trying to get a handle on it because it seemed to be obviously an extremely important issue. And thinking it through, I came to realize I think it's a matter of fact, it's not opinion. I think it is clearly demonstrable fact that if you accept the abortion of an unborn human being at any stage of life for any reason other than to save another life, what you're in effect saying is that the value of a human life is only as much as we assign to it.
Yeah.
That there is no intrinsic value to human life. That if you could kill a child at 10 weeks, 15 weeks, 30 weeks, you can do it at any time, and there's no logical reason whatsoever why that right to kill stops at birth. And
Right.
if that is true, and it is true, I mean, it's just manifestly the case, and others have argued this more eloquently than myself in some very good books on abortion. The reality is that no human right of any sort can really exist. Because if your rights are to actual right to life doesn't exist except at the pleasure of society or other people, then you have no right to life, you have no right to freedom, you have no right to anything.
Right.
There is no logical reason why you could not reinstitute slavery if you believe that rights are purely human creations. If you don't believe that there is an intrinsic right to life, then the whole house of cards collapses. And it seems to be important that it's an argument that isn't just confined to religious believers of any denomination. It seems to me that somebody like Nat Hentoff, who was an atheist, understood this immediately. He was a Jewish atheist, and he was a very, very strong pro-lifer, and he understood immediately exactly this point. I believe in human rights. I can't believe in human rights if there's a right to abortion. The two simply can't exist in the same planet. And
Mhm.
so right off from the bat, just immediately, it's clear that the defense of your life, not just from abortion, but from other attacks, is simply essential to the defense of the basic structure of society as we understand it. And if you pull that away, over time, slowly, or sometimes more rapidly, everything will collapse. And
Right.
if you don't have a right, if abortion is okay, then euthanasia is as certain to follow as day and night. And it also seemed to me from the very start that if abortion is accepted, euthanasia inevitably follows, and that it would still be my prediction, the more Canadians will end up dying each year eventually from euthanasia than from abortion. Because most people will become, at the end of life, fairly inconvenient to their existence to the state, and they'll be invited to depart. And if they don't accept the invitation graciously, they'll be ushered out somewhat more forcefully. So the defense of life from abortion is basically a defense of civilization. And
Right.
I think non-Christians, non-believers should recognize that.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's so all the more reason for us to be involved, right? Like you said, things are happening more rapidly in euthanasia. Like that's becoming sadly, unfortunately, more common. And so I guess my question to you, Ellen, is what would you say to people who are not involved with Guelph Area Right to Life, pro-life work? What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say that you will inherit a world that where there is no value on any life, and it's very, very open now. I'm doing my typical thing because I've forgotten his name, but not too long ago, the governor of, was it Virginia or somewhere in the States, and he was a medical doctor, and he was talking about abortion, and if a baby were born and alive, they would make the baby comfortable and then discuss with the mother what to do with the baby. I mean, that would be blatantly, they would be killing a baby who's right there, breathing and struggling to live. And he said it very openly on a radio program. And I'm sure it's common. There are a lot of live births after, and the guy who's running for vice president of the United States with Kamala Harris, he also said, that babies should not be kept alive if they're born alive. should not be, they shouldn't be rescued.
Mm.
Excuse me. So this is the world. And when we look at euthanasia itself, our laws in Canada, and that's why, you know, it's getting worse and worse. And now it's going to be euthanasia for no reason at all. I mean, it already is, isn't it? You know, and so this is the world.
Once it moves into
Yes.
mental health, particularly,
Yes.
yeah.
It
And
will
there are
be
no-
a
There are
terrible,
no criteria and no limits, yeah.
yeah.
So how would you encourage people who are not yet involved? Because it could be easy for me to say, you know what, I can't do anything about it, so why bother?
Well, that's a defeatist attitude. And you're going to have to live in the world, and your children are going to have to live in the world, and your grandchildren. And the world that you fight for now is the world that they will inherit. That's really the bottom line, isn't it? You've got to leave a better world.
Yeah.
You know, and if we look back at the horrors that have taken place with the communist governments and the Nazis and everything else, we have to say, imagine if the Nazis had won. Look what communism like. Look what Stalin did. You know, the people who were killed, the starvation and everything else. That's the world that we don't want.
Right.
That's the world that we thought would not exist after the end of the Second World War. But unfortunately, it's getting worse and worse.
Mhm.
You know,
It's sad to see. What about you, Keith? What would you say to somebody who's not involved in Guelph and Area Right to Life or the pro-life movement?
I think there's two reasons to get involved. Possibly three. One is if you just say, well, it's hopeless, the other side is one, the pro-abortionists have won, the cause is hopeless. I think we're underestimating the fact that they're eager to squelch all discussion because they know that their victory is an uneasy one. That their position is essentially untenable because unless you accept the ability to extinguish all human rights just at the whim of the state, then anybody who rejects that ultimately will be open to a pro-life position, has to be. So it's important not to despair, but to believe that if you keep on fighting, there are actually more people out there who support you than you think. It's that whole
Right.
phenomenon I was talking about at the end of the meeting, with people sidling up to you and saying, well, actually, secretly, I agree with you.
Exactly.
You've got to encourage them. So a public witness, and encourage them to make a public witness, so that society doesn't wholly lapse into this. The second reason to do it is for yourself. Because at the end of the day, at the end of your life, you're going to be asked, what did you do?
Right.
The whole foundation of your civilization, which rested on the notion of the innate dignity of human life, was under attack, and you decided that it would be better to go play golf than go to a life change.
Yeah.
That was your solution for the world crisis that you're living in. I hope you enjoyed that round, Mr. Jones, because we got a fate waiting for you. This is the other thing is that as an historian, I kind of retain the belief that perhaps 500 years from now, societies do change and evolve. This society is not going to live forever in its current form. It can't because it's not stable. It's essentially unstable, and
Yeah.
it's unsustainable, and it contains contradictory principles, and it will evolve. And the people who are having kids and going out and bringing life on are by and large increasingly more pro-life. And so there's over time, society will change in unexpected ways. It would be nice if 500 years from now, people could look back and say, well, it wasn't a total wasteland. There were, in fact, even in the direst of circumstances, people who, in fact, refused to go along with this. People who stood up and publicly witnessed that this was wrong. And they were ridiculed and abused and told that they were crazy. But this was, I'm going to turn off the phone here. They were crazy, but they kept on doing it anyway. And so that's I think, a consideration.
Yeah.
Society and for yourself, just your own self-respect. If you know that something is a hideous crime, not speaking out in some fashion is something you'll have trouble forgiving yourself for.
For sure. I love how you broke that up into different points. And even I know my sister, she's talked to some people about abortion and she kind of just asked them, like, how do you feel about it? And a lot of people can't even explain why they think it's okay or not okay. And they realize, okay, I just need to think about this actually. Like, I'm
Yes.
just being indoctrinated, but I like when I have to actually walk through this in human rights and actually thinking about it, then they realize this is kind of unfounded. I'm just going with the flow of everybody else.
We have created a large number of women in this culture, particularly, who have significant mental health problems,
Mhm.
many of which can be attributed to early abortions. When you think the statistic is at least 1 in 4 women have had abortions. No, none of the mental health professionals are willing to recognize that, unfortunately, because they too, as you say, are indoctrinated by the universities and the counseling profession. But we have created this whole epidemic of women
Right.
who are struggling. And and as a result, so cognitively, a thing called cognitive dissonance, they have to defend what they have done in
Right.
order to kind of prove they're all right, even though they're not, even though they may be having all these problems. So, it's not just the physical problems that we know about that happen after, but it's the mental health issues, the psychological issues that are there, which lead to personal problems in anxiety and depression and all the mental health, but also lead to people either seeing the light, as it were, and converting to being pro-life, or feeling the need to constantly bash it and not not allow the pro-life message to go through properly because of their own disorders from the event, which are not being dealt with. So it's very important that there are young people like yourself around who will help young women face this, like deal with it, and when they come in and say, I feel anxious, I feel depressed, recognize the potential for it being a post-traumatic stress from an abortion, not from just society in general, which is not great.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's an area that is very seldom looked at, but which is essential to help bring people to see that as an issue in society. I don't know if that doesn't quite answer your question, but I think it's a kind
No, it's great.
perspective that I think it doesn't get talked about a lot,
Right. Mhm. If you dig deep and then you find out the reason they're having these mental health issues and these struggles in their life is because they had an abortion and they regret it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's that guilt that has been pushed down. Yeah.
You can't not know what you have done.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's the reaction, the furious reaction against pro-life is an extremely guilty reaction. This is not just a difference of opinion about some abstract matter. It's very important for some people to maintain their facade that I've never done any bad thing, but in the very
Yep.
back of their mind, they know I've done a terrible thing. And so
Right.
I just scream and howl. And what's the current big deal in the States of feminist push, and you hear about it in relation to the politics of the current election? Shout your abortion, sort of proud of it, scream it out, show it how proud you are that you've had an abortion. I'm thinking, at that point, you're dealing with something quite pathological. I mean,
Mhm.
I want to shout out with joy the fact that I killed another human being. What?
Yeah.
So we have a society of women with major issues that no one is willing to address because it's supposed to be safe for you, and there's not supposed to be any problems afterwards psychologically, but there are.
There definitely are for sure.
Yeah.
That's a great thing to remember and think about. So as we kind of wrap up, Ellen, I was wondering, do you have anything you'd like to add or talk about?
Not really. I except that I hope more people do get involved, because the future of the world depends on it. It depends on you young people. And I'm so glad to see that Right to Life is still going in Guelph after all these years, and that there are people, young people like you, who have the courage to step forward and espouse an unpopular cause, because it is increasingly unpopular, I think. Yes.
So I
Could
think we
certainly do more. But how about you, Keith?
No,
Do you have
I agree. I think we have to persevere. And the other thing we've always said to ourselves, I think I still, from the earliest days of pro-life, if whatever we're doing saves a single human life, it will have been worth it. And I
That's the
can't
best
believe
outlook.
that we haven't, in fact, saved a number of human lives. And it is the case that those unborn lives, and to put it back into a religious context, I'm trying to remember who was the pro-life leader I talked to some years ago. Was it Joe Scheidler? He said, well, he said, you know, when you die, there will be a legion of intercessors on your behalf saying, this is somebody who tried to save my life, or this is somebody who did save my life. These lives that are taken don't just disappear. I mean, these are human lives which are being snuffed out, but will, in fact, in the ultimate balance of creation, weigh enormously as real live beings. And so I think that if we're having any impact at all, I think it's good to do it. It's essential for this well-being of our society and ourselves. And it's interesting just that to get a bit more political and just kind of I'm really interested by the fact that our current prime minister is so obsessively pro-abortion that one of his major efforts is to spend literally billions of dollars to export abortion to the rest of the world. And you think, what is going on in there from your background that makes this such an obsessive quest? Not just to approve abortion or facilitate it in Canada, but obsessively try to push it on the rest of the world. There's a sign of a profound disturbance there. And so we are, as Father King, who's founder of University Faculty of Life, to put it, we are in fact struggling against thrones and dominions and principalities and powers. There are forces against which we wrestle that are extraordinarily powerful and fortunately are not indeed invincible and will ultimately fail.
Right.
So a shout out in a positive sense to Jackie, who's carried the torch for so long, you know that, and has done such an amazing job. Yeah,
Yes.
Yes.
keeping things going, not keeping things going, but growing things too, and spreading out the word and just being solidly there. You know,
Thank you.
for the
I
whole
would, now I have you three on though, if I may, Brooke, just bring a couple of things in. With the mental health that we've just done, and that's Alliance for Life, but we have just had commissioned a study across Canada of women between the age of 41 and 45 who've had abortions.
Right.
And the statistic from that study, and Dave Reardon did it. The statistic, one huge statistic, was that 60% of them were coerced or forced against their own values to have that abortion. And I know I'm not as well read as you both are, but that forcing to do something that's against your will, that has got to leave you with some sort of mental health struggle, in my estimation. And then Keith, you talking about the millions of dollars to other countries. Well, you may know about it, but I've only just discovered that there is a group called the Contraception and Abortion Research Team. It's Dr. Wendy Norman and ARC and all the old faithfuls, or the usual suspects, as they say. And basically, he has sunk millions of dollars into them. And we now have a network right across the country, 5 5 hospitals that are hubs to send out information. We've got training for pharmacists to make so that abortion is healthcare, training for student nurses, abortion is healthcare, Midwives Association, the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, all working together right across our country, funded with millions of dollars by the government. And, you know, it's looking at it, it was the first time ever that I've sort of looked at it and thought, whoa, how do we fight? How on earth do we fight all that together? I'd like to send you the details of that if you haven't seen it, because we really need some very good heads.
Yes, please send us some more information on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, the crux of the whole thing is we have become so centered on expertise
Yes.
and institutions that are government funded, that it's very difficult for researchers to actually do anything in Canada, because they will get no funding whatsoever from any government agency unless they push what you're talking about.
Mhm.
Nothing pro-life will ever be done. In fact, the research is all biased, and it's biased because of 2 or 3 things. But one is when a study comes out, they will often in the results discover that there are problems, but that is either statistically removed by manipulation of the numbers, or by the end of the discussion, it doesn't even get raised. So researchers are not able to even include it if they find it in studies. So it really is, when you talk about what the studies show is how bias can be brought to be in anything that peer review research comes into, because they are status quo. They will publish what comes from this group. They'll get published everywhere. But if anyone wrote something that was contrary to that, even if they could get funding to find something else, they would not ever get published in a peer-reviewed journal.
Mhm.
So the bias is so systemic at this point
Mhm.
that it's really difficult. In the States, it's a little easier because they're not as centralized in their funding, and they're more diverse in their state populations and in the states themselves.
Right.
Really homogenous here. Mhm.
Yep. And it's very sad. And then you're like, what can I do? But really, all the more reason for us to be in prayer and showing up these life chains and financially giving and raising our voices for sure.
Well, we still can.
Right.
Increasingly, free speech is being controlled and the information is not going to be allowed. So now is the time to act while you still can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Jackie, did you have more questions?
No, I just think it's amazing to have all 3 of you, because Keith, you may have forgotten, but you came to my house not long after I was involved, and you told me that there were only 12 questions, 12 arguments I had to learn, and I nearly fainted on the spot because I thought there was only one. But just a big thank you for being my heroes. You have been, ever since I came to Canada and got involved, you've been my hero. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Jackie, because you're our hero. You have carried the torch and kept the faith. And in the face of considerable opposition, which we all know has become much more shrill and hate-filled, very personal and hateful. There are some very disturbed people out there on the other side, and I think they have to understand in charity why they're disturbed, because they've been touched by a demon who's really, their minds have been badly affected. And I don't think these are, in a way, their anger is almost reassuring, because it indicates that there's still a struggle going on within them.
Yeah. Well, thank you. But we would have nothing in this city without you 3. And I've always felt between a rock and a hard place, because I daren't fail and I daren't stop because I didn't want to face you. I'd rather face you than the other. I'd rather face the other side. But no, thank you, because you did train me well. And yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys again for joining us. It's been so good to hear the history and get to know you guys. I think it's definitely very inspiring for me.